friends, welcome back for another Twisted Tea video. I'm your hostess Natasha, and as you're all coming to learn quickly, I have this deep love and obsession for what makes somebody tick. I've enjoyed people watching for as long as I can remember. In fact, one of my favorite games to play is a little game that I like to call Who, What, Where, When, and Why. I just have to briefly glance at somebody and I can come up with an entire profile and background story to explain why they're crossing paths with me that day. I actually get super into it, and sometimes I'll even go as far as telling you about somebody's husband's heart attack 7 years ago and what they had for breakfast. Does that make me creepy? Ever since I was 10, I've wanted to be a psychologist. I even went to school for a while to study psychology, specializing in children. I fully believe in my heart that without my psychologist as a child, I never could have made it. Life got in the way and I made excuses for myself, and here I am on YouTube instead. Maybe one day I'll go back to it. Anywho, here I am rambling again. I'm going to take a slightly different approach to my video on today's case than I typically will, because this case just is not typical. We're going to untwist the tea, if you will. This time we're going to focus more on the childhood and the who and why than the what, where, and when. I've watched hours of YouTube videos, documentaries, and even read the book about the disgusting and just inhumane things that this individual's done. But I wanted to know more about his history and what in his mind led him to being known as the real-life Hannibal Lecter. We are of course talking about the Versailles Ransacker, aka the Diamond Knot Killer, aka the original Night Stalker, aka the East Area Rapist, aka the Golden State Killer, aka Joseph James D'Angelo. These were all thought to be serial offenders in 6 different California counties. Collectively, their rap sheets consist of 150 burglaries, 50 rapes, and 13 murders that we know of. These heinous crimes occurred from 1974 until 1986, with the grotesque nature of the crimes increasing as time passed. Initially, there were no connections found between the sick, twisted bastards that were committing these crimes. The evolution of DNA analysis and testing decades later would prove that these were all the same psychopath, and subsequently led to his arrest in 2018, 42 years after his last known attack. We now know that he managed to evade capture for more than 40 years because, like investigators have always assumed, he was a former police officer and specialized in burglaries and break-ins specifically. So he knew exactly how to get into your house undetected. He also served in the US Navy for a short period of time, and that's where he learned to tie a knot. He was very organized and careful and would stalk his victims for months before he struck. It would be near impossible for me to touch on every life that this disgusting slime bucket either affected or took. I could literally go on for hours about everything that we know this monster has done. I'm sure you've all heard details about this case, hence why you clicked on this video or found it in the first place. So I won't bore you with repeating them, but what we can do is try to get into his head a little bit. Now, before we move on, I want to make sure that everybody understands that I am in no way, shape, or form making excuses. This man is a demon-spawned sadist who deserves to be castrated and thrown into an incinerator, kicking and screaming. I simply just want to look at what sent him down that dark and twisty road. I think you'll all agree that it's interesting comparing the mindset and experiences that people who turn out like this tend to share. So many serial killers come from similar backgrounds and show signs of sadism and psychopathy at such a young age, like harming animals, causing fires, and being narcissistic and manipulative. Trauma, abuse, and isolation are so often the norm for these individuals as children. You mix together all the things that a child could possibly endure, and you get Joseph James D'Angelo Jr. The truth is, this was always bound to happen, and it was always a recipe for disaster. After you see what this man endured as a child, you'll understand why if nobody stopped him, this was completely inevitable. All right, now let's attempt to untwist this tea. Joseph James D'Angelo Jr. was born on November 8, 1945 in Bath, New York, to parents Joseph James D'Angelo Sr. and Catherine DeGroat. I'm just going to call him the Golden State Killer so we don't get him confused. We all know who that is, right? The Golden State Killer had 2 sisters, Rebecca or Becky, and Constance or Connie, and a brother, John. Joe was second in birthing order, with only his sister Becky being older. Joseph Sr. was in the Air Force, and his wife and children were accustomed to following him from base to base as the Air Force saw fit. According to his nephew, Jesse Ryland, who is Connie's son, when the Golden State Killer was 9 years old, his father and the family were stationed in Germany. The Golden State Killer and his younger sister, Connie, were playing in an abandoned warehouse when two men came in and brutally raped 7-year-old Connie in front of her big brother. Upon arriving home, the siblings told their parents what had happened, and their parents adamantly insisted that they never bring this up to anyone else. These kinds of things just weren't talked about back then. For Connie, as only a 7-year-old girl, to not be able to safely go home and talk about what she had just endured must have been so confusing, lonely, and maddening. I can only imagine that the response from her parents made her feel like she had done something wrong and like they didn't want people to know what she had done. This trauma obviously would have stuck with both of them forever, just in different ways. One could only assume that this led the Golden State Killer to believe that this is what adult men did and that it was constituted. If you're not familiar with the Freudian theory of psychosexual development, you should definitely look into it. As Connie's older brother, John would have been seen as her protector. He should have been protecting her, right? This thought would have been just another thought that went through his head that helped fuck him up. While this is ass backwards and completely creepy, we can understand how a 9-year-old boy wouldn't have known what to think about this. Who knows the feelings that he perceived and internalized after watching this attack on his poor baby sister? Likewise, and unfortunately, there have been interviews with a few of the Golden State Killer's victims where they reported the same response from their parents. One woman even stated that she thought it was a secret until she saw the face of another victim on the evening news one night. She was so taken aback from that she sent the news station her phone number to pass on to the fellow victim, so that she could finally speak with someone who understood exactly what she had gone through firsthand. She went on to state that if her parents were still alive, she wouldn't have even showed up for the interview because they would have been so disturbed by her speaking about it publicly. She also went on to create this huge gathering where all the survivors could come together and kind of heal and talk about their experiences and just get to know one another. Everybody who goes through something like this, as unfortunate as it would be to know that he attacked somebody else, everybody needs someone who understands. But do y'all understand that logic? Because I absolutely do not. I cannot imagine shutting my child out from venting and healing just because it made me uncomfortable. It doesn't matter at all how the parents feel when compared to the victim. I could literally ramble about this subject all day, you have no idea, but I won't. These were different times and I try to understand that. There were several incident reports of domestic disputes and marital problems between Joe Sr. and Catherine when the children were young. We can only imagine and speculate about the things those poor children must have witnessed. Joe Sr. was physically assaulting his wife, and she was physically assaulting the children. Jesse Ryland, again, she's Connie's son, reported after his uncle's arrest that his mother talked about wearing 2 pairs of pants when she was a child to lessen the pain from the blows from her mother. According to Connie, the Golden State Killer got the worst of the abuse. She seemingly tortured all 4 of her children for years, though. Joe Sr. had received threats from the Air Force stating that he would be dishonorably discharged if he didn't keep his hands off his wife. Eventually, Joe Sr. was restationed in South Korea, and his wife and children stayed behind. They subsequently got a divorce, and he eventually retired in Korea and started a new family. Family members have reported that he had 3 kids with his second wife and gave them the same names as his first children, Joe Jr., Constance, and Rebecca. Which is so fucking weird to me. Those poor kids. I can imagine that the first set felt like their dad just wanted to completely erase them and start over. And the second set of kids must have felt the complete opposite, like, oh, he misses them and loved them so much we could never compare to them, so he named us after them. The Golden State Killer was an average student and graduated from Folsom High School in 1964. He joined the U.S. Navy in '67, where he served aboard the USS Canberra off the coast of Vietnam during the Vietnam War. The training, fear during war, and witnessing the war in general all played major roles in shaping his character as well. PTSD is very real and very scary. It will completely rewire your brain. Another thing that people speculate would have fucked this man up is that every woman he's come into sexual contact with, both romantically or forced, have reported that he has an extremely small, unusually small penis. He experienced years of rejection because of this and built up this deep hatred for women. When he was finally captured, the Golden State Killer initially claimed that he was driven to commit these heinous crimes by an alter identity within himself that he referred to as Jerry. Now, I'm not really here to speculate. I prefer to give you provable facts, but I like this theory, so let's go with it. I agree this may be stretching it a little bit, and he may have just been trying to get some sympathy, but like I said, it's pretty interesting, and there were several police reports where his victims talked about him arguing with himself in the corner. The specific theory revolves around his time spent in Germany when his father was fighting in World War II. Each country fighting in the war had a nickname. As we all learned in history class here in America, the Americans were referred to as the Yanks or Yankees. Less commonly known though here in the US, the Germans were referred to as, you guessed it, Jerry. Many people think that the trauma he experienced when Connie was raped in Germany, along with the war, rewired his brain, and that he brought the imaginary friend or alter ego Jerry back with him. I've read tons of theories about the psychological state of the Golden State Killer at different points of his life. I've read things about before his career started, during the attacks, while he was retired, and even things on the psychological state that he's in now after being incarcerated and finding out that he's going to spend the rest of his natural life locked in a cage like the feral animal that he is. For some reason, he wants himself to be the victim now. He portrays himself as this old brittle man who can't stand on his own, is pushed in the wheelchair onto the floor. He sits there lethargic with his eyes closed. It's just a complete disgrace. But there's footage from his cell showing him climbing up the side of the bunk beds to the top to clean the light next to the top bunk in the cell.
Now, prosecutors say D'Angelo is faking it. Sacramento District Attorney Anne Marie Schubert just released this video showing the monster springing up on a table in his cell to fix a light. Here, he's exercising, and here he's wiping the floor with a rag under his shoe.
It's weird how he's been feared all these years, and all of these people have been hoping to see his face and try to find out who he is. We've all pictured this huge monster, and now he's being pushed into the courtroom in this little wheelchair, all frail and brittle. It's kind of ironic. But let's backtrack a little bit to how he was captured, because that's ironic too. The Golden State Killer was finally captured on April 24th, 2018 in Citrus Heights, California after a 42-year hiatus. He was captured at no fault of his own either. The police finally found the guy that they had been searching for decades by comparing DNA samples left behind at his crime scenes all those years ago to samples that had been submitted to ancestry websites. They found a sample that matched, but it was a very distant cousin. They were able to work off of this distant cousin's family tree and unravel his family tree, and they eliminated people by age, sex, location, until they finally narrowed it down to 2 people. While they had 2 persons of interest at the time, they were really zooming in on D'Angelo. They were sure they had found their guy. They just had to prove it beyond reasonable doubt. They located his home, staked it out for a while, and then admit to taking a tissue out of his trash can and comparing it to a DNA sample that they had found in 1974. The Golden State Killer originally pleaded not guilty. The state quickly realized that with his age and the extent and amount of crimes that they would have to try him for made the chances slim to none that they would ever get justice for all of his poor victims. They decided to make a plea deal, and the Golden State Killer agreed to plead guilty and receive a sentence of 25 years to life in order to avoid the long, expensive trial that originally awaited him. It was estimated that this trial was going to take up to 10 years, and I can't even begin to fathom how long it would take to prepare for a trial like this. He may not have even lived through the preparation to ever see the scheduled date for it to start. And if he did see that day, chances are that he would die a lonely, slow, painful death before the trial was ever over. I guess I get it, but it's not closure for the victims or their families. Each victim's story is not going to be told. Each victim doesn't get the chance to confront her attacker. I guess there never really could be complete closure, but this is about as far from it as it gets, next to not ever finding him at all. I mean, this man affected so many lives. He affected not only the lives of the victims that he let survive, but the families of the victims that he did not. He robbed homes for valuables and sentimental items that can never be replaced. He also affected the lives of everyone close to him and in his life, as well as the entire state of California and far beyond that. Everyone who's heard about this prolific serial killer has been shaken to their core. The amount of stalking that went into his attacks is completely bone-chilling. To think that someone could be watching me and studying my life that closely, seemingly undetected. It's a mind fuck, it really is. It's absolutely terrifying There are hundreds of seemingly everyday people lurking around out there in the real world. No one ever suspected D'Angelo as the Golden State Killer even one time over the years. The police questioned hundreds and hundreds of people, as you can imagine with this kind of a rap sheet. There were so many people closely involved in his life, and he even had a wife and kids that were making these moves with him to new counties. This was all over the news and in every newspaper across the nation eventually. It's so hard to fathom that she never suspected him once. How did she not make that connection? How did no one make that connection? I guess I'll leave you with that thought. It's pretty crazy to think that it could be the person who sits next to you at work, or the person driving you around in the Uber. It could be your professor or your electrician. It could be your stepdad. It could be your brother. It is insane. Well, that's it for me today, guys. I hope you all stay safe and stay aware out there. Peace and love.